Okay, in my quest to learning web fundamentals, I was reading about server-side rendering and client-side rendering, and I wanted to talk about it in this video. These are quite interesting topics, and I just wanted to, talk briefly on what exactly they are and what is the use case. So earlier, back in internet days, we would have websites that were built using PHP as backend. And what would happen was that all the communication that would happen between the database uh, would be done on the server side. And then an output file would be sent to the client. So that was basically server side rendering or SSR. But with these latest technologies of frameworks such as Angular and React, wherein we have this capability of creating very robust and highly performant web application, which are called as single page applications or SPAs. Over here, usually we started with client side rendering, but now with latest versions of this React library and Angular, we have the support that is provided for server side rendering. So what is server side rendering? As we said, it is a kind of an old technology. Basically, the entire web page is generated towards the server and then sent to the client. Now, the server includes all the necessary data, whatever the communication that has to happen between the database, whatever the output that it has to create, that everything has been taken care on the server side. And ultimately, an rendered HTML is then sent to the client. So basically, the client then receives the fully rendered page and it displays on to the user. Over here, the advantage of server-side rendering would be that it helps in search engine optimization. Why? Because we have this entire web page that is available to us on the client, and we don't have to uh, wait for the API calls that happen on the client to render the data. So it would be beneficial in case of, let's say, if you have an e-commerce website. Wouldn't it be beneficial to generate the entire product page on the server side and then directly return it to the client on demand? It would help to see the entire web page for the user, and as well as it would be beneficial for search engine optimization. Another advantage is the load time. As I said earlier, the performance is very high because rendering happens on the server side. If it was on the client side, let's say user had to down get a page for Apple iPhone. They would have to when they call the URL, it would go down the browser certain parts of the page, and then after a certain time, it would call an API and then get the details of the iPhone, which would be the image, its version name, some features, etc. So over here, what is happening is the user has to wait a little longer to be able to get the data from the client when requested from the client and then render it on the UI. So SSR provides you a good performance benefit. So the initial page load benefit or the page load performance is better when it comes to server side rendering. Okay, now let us talk about client side rendering. Over here, client-side rendering means that user is requesting something from the server. So let's say an e-commerce website. He gets certain elements on the page from the server, and then it has to wait because it has to wait. Why? Because the client, the user's client, would go and request the necessary JavaScript files as well as the CSS files to first get it downloaded on the client. And then the JavaScript and the CSS would get rendered based on the load or some event that happens on the client. So this is basically client-side rendering. So the web server would send like the minimal HTML document that is required for the client. But as I said, it has to wait for the JavaScript and the CSS file to get downloaded on the client's browser. But when would we use this client-side rendering? Let's say you want to have let's say there is an e-commerce website that uh, gives you like personal recommendations. How you would get a recommendation based on a user's uh, history, browsing history, and that would be stored on the server. So let's say the UI loads, the e-commerce website loads on the client, user is logged in. Now, based on the user's logging in, there would be some communication that would happen to the server, and server would then return the recommendation based on some API. So, like for an e-commerce website, if we had to, get some personalized user specific content, then client-side rendering would be much beneficial. Then certain interaction that we want to have from user side, such as let's say user has to personalize something. Let's say he buys an iPhone, but then he wants to, or the user wants to be able to, change the panel or maybe add certain features to it, like add some products, add-ons to it, or maybe, go and it is like a custom product wherein they can write their name, which would then be embossed on the uh, cover of the iPhone, for example. So something that is very interactive that user has to do based on whatever uh, the feature that is. That would require, client-side rendering. Why? Because user would do something, maybe, there would be a third-party API call that would happen to get like the location of the user, and then based on the location, they would either address the user as uh, maybe something like that. So anything that is personalized or anything that is requires users interaction, client-side rendering would be much beneficial. So yes, this is like the two things that is very talked about currently in the field of web development, server-side rendering and client-side rendering. And I wanted to talk about it because currently I'm also learning about it.